Chalk the pocket opening onto both sides of the back trouser. If just one pocket, it's usually on the right trouser. I suggest you look at the single welted pocket video, if I've remade it yet, as a guide to where to put the pocket. On the inside of the trouser, at the edges of the pocket opening, you should use two 3x3 squares of I also need to apply fusing to where my buttonhole will go. Therefore, I measure 1.5 centimeters below the pocket hole, marking the hole straight down perpendicular to the pocket opening, measuring another 15 millimeters for the length of the buttonhole, fusing over it so that I can cut it later. Line up the pocket bag with the linen over the inside pocket opening so that the linen is facing the cloth and the top of the pocket is 2.5 centimeters above the opening. Make sure that the silicea is even on both sides of the opening as well, basting it as we usually do with silicea. Then get the jets up too. Line the first jet evenly onto the pocket opening, measuring that you have the same amount of jet on each side, basting it down. Copy off each side of the pocket opening onto the first jet, line the second jet up to the first jet, basting it down, and chalking on each side of the pocket opening. I want the bastes holding the jets in place to be very secure so that the fabric, and by extension the chalk marks, will move as little as possible in the machine. This is just important stuff to know. To sew them down, I want to reiterate, again, that getting the start and end point parallel is important. Don't stitch more than 0.5 centimeter from the pocket opening. We really want the two to be 1 centimeter apart. Having used a sharp piece of chalk will make getting them parallel easier. You'll see more clearly exactly where to start and end. If the machine pushes and stretches the jets, you could have basted it more thoroughly, or just half ignore the chalk marks. Just make sure that the stitches start and end in line with each other. And make sure the bottom of the silicea is out of the way, which I bring up for no particular reason. Give the stitching a press, remove all the basting so far. Cut the pocket hole and be sure to cut your chevrons. Should you wish, I bet longer chevrons would make the next steps easier. Just a thought. From the back, without folding the jets through, we can press open the seam allowances. If you have cloth soap, we can brush some onto and into the seams between the pieces to help hold them open. That said, I have very little idea what I'm doing with the soap here. I'm brushing it on because that's something I've seen. I'm pulling out and pressing the miters down first here. The seam allowance is split where the jet fabric meets the trouser fabric. I'm folding up the silicea, the linen, and the trouser. I'm folding out the seam allowances before pressing the jets towards the pocket opening as here as well. With this method, the welts are generally more sunken into the trouser, which can be an effect you might want. We can use a wooden block if we want and use it to press on what we've ironed. It'll absorb the remaining moisture and help the creases to set. We'll press up the lower jet or press down the upper jet, doesn't matter which order. We'll fold the jet towards the pocket opening to the stitching and we'll iron along the seam. Of course, ironing either side of the unmachined portion of the jet as well. Fold the jet we just did through the pocket hole. Make sure it's flat so that we don't have to worry about creasing it again. Now pressing the other jet from the front, pressing along the stitching. When it's pressed, send the second one through the pocket hole as well. I just want to touch up the ironing on the lower jet here. We'll baste the welts. Fold the jets down over the seam allowance. If it was done precisely, the seam allowance should be 5mm. We want the two welts to meet in the middle without gaping or overlapping. Then baste them in place along the welt. No, not the trouser, only basting through the welt. Slip stitch the two welts together as well. This way they won't move laterally, making sewing the chevrons easier. Press the welts like that, still making sure they are linear all the way across. While I'm here, I'll iron the lower jet under itself about 1 cm onto the silicia. Fold the trouser and the silicia either above or below the pocket out of the way, exposing only the welt. We need to machine the welt to the seam that was ironed out of the pocket opening. There is only 0.5 cm to sew to, but we should get as close to the first stitch as we did as possible without sewing over it again. I'm not backtacking, just sewing across most of the length of each welt in as straight a line as possible. Sew both the top and the bottom welts. Then for the chevrons, fold them to the reverse if not already pulled and pull the end, moving the trouser and silicia out of the way. Hold the ends of the two jets together, making sure they're flat there. You might like to do a preliminary stitch across the jets to keep them together. Pulling the miter taut, stitch exactly across where it's cut, between the two layers of stitching right where they end. Go back and forth over the hem. When you've got a good strong base, machine the welts together that are just flapping around now. Iron the jets to make them more crispy wispy, and at the same time the lower welt up such that you can baste it in place if you didn't do that already. We can edge stitch the welt to the pocket opening. It's much faster and it is stronger. Line up the bearer to the other pocket piece, either making them even or offset the bearer relative to the lower jet by 1 centimeter and sew that in place one way or another. I'm edge stitching. I'm cutting away a small amount of the bearer and welts so that I don't sew them down in the first stitch of the French seam. So I'm cutting away about 6 or 7 millimeters from the raw edge of the silesia. Having fastened the welt to the pocket bag, I need to prepare the buttonhole that I fused earlier. I know that I want the hole 15 millimeters below the pocket opening and it's 15 millimeters wide, so I just prepare that in the normal way that I show in my buttonhole video. Folding the trouser out of the way, I baste my pocket bags together before machining them, but it could be easy just to hold them together, since they're the same size. Folding the trouser up and out of the way, applying the bearer facing outwards away from the trouser. We line up the bottoms of the pocket bag and the raw edges. Sew around the perimeter with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance. Back tack at the top of the shortest silesia when we start and end. You can see that I'm not sewing through the welts or the bearer. I trimmed away a little of the excess silesia, specifically cutting away more of the cloth around the curve. Flip the pocket bag right way out. Pull all the stitching to the very edge of the pocket and press it flat. The raw edges of the pocket on top will also be folded over here. Towards the top, make the seam a bit larger, meeting the top of the other pocket. Press the whole of the seam in place as well. From the very top, we will machine around the top of the pocket with a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance to French seam the pocket. Something important to note is that when the front and back pockets are put together properly, i.e. the raw edges are exactly lined up and they are identical in width and the stitching is properly pulled to the very edges, there won't be any excess across the top of the pocket bag when we close the top. So if it's done perfectly, we can either seal the top of the pocket back first or do the second French seam first. That said, I usually seal the top of the pocket closed first so that I don't have to worry about it. Here, I did it second, but I did the pocket perfectly so there wasn't any excess between the French seams. From the front, fold away the trouser again, like I just talked about, and stitch across the top of the pocket above the top welt. This closes the top of the pocket, which incidentally also seals any tabs or flaps up there. Iron and inspect your seams, and if they're good, we're good to go. Our back trousers are ready, and we can make the front trousers now. This is a different way of attaching the pocket than my other video. It might be easier and specifically better when we have patterned fabric. First order of business is to attach the pocketing and facing to the pocket opening. Take the facing, which will be attached to the slisha, and place it onto the correct side, the outside of the appropriate trouser, lining up the notches. There is only one correct way around for each trouser when placing the facing onto the outside. Take the pieces of 3 cm linen we cut, line it up to the edge of the pocket piece on the slisha on the outside of the two pieces. Baste them all together and give yourself chalk marks at the notches. Sew them together only between the notches with another small centimetre seam allowance, so 7 or 8 millimeters. Cut down to the notches and you might find yourself with a nicer end result to angle the cut from between the notches. Plus, again, cutting away half of the seam from the facing, pocketing and linen. Iron the seam towards the slisha. Fold the pocket over and be sure that the front is bleeding out to the back. Here I will cut away the 1 cm seam of the small facing and the slisha from above the notch. We should cut to the same place that we cut the notch the first time. We can fold the top of the front trouser above the pocket so that it creates a linear line to the top of the trouser. We can crease that now for later. Should your fabric feature a pattern, that should already be close, but lay the front trouser atop the blind in order to make it perfect, which is why we mark stitch the pocket line and the notches. The top of the blind and the trouser should line up as well. Pin them together. Flip it over and fold the slisha back over onto its other half, and pin the blind onto only the slisha. Remove the original pins so that you can maneuver the blind and its piece of pocket and attach it. remembering at the bottom that we're leaving a centimetre unstitched on the raw side, in the same way that we did for the facing. At this point, we'll French seam the pocket. For the pocket technique that I want to use this time, it's important that I don't catch the big facing in the French seam at all. But if you do, then you can attach the big facing and front trouser at the bottom in the same way that I did in the sample pocket. Now we need to be able to move the pocket bag away in order to sew the front trouser and blind together. This is why we left the centimetre or so unsewn. Only cutting through the silesia that is in between the front trouser and the blind. Cut the silesia to about level, if a little below the blind. Extend the cut 1 centimetre behind the raw edge of the blind. If we did the blind slightly wrong, we may have caught the blind in the French seam. If this happens, we can just cut 1 centimetre into the blind. Cutting away this small square of silesia in line with the side seam. We need to stitch the blind and the front trouser together, sewing about halfway over the seam allowance. Go back and forth over with the machine. We can pin all of these together and we can move the silesia away freely. To fix the trouser front to the blind at the top of the pocket opening, make sure you know where it's going. Have the pocket opening flat on the blind and carry on the pocket line upwards. You also need to make the commencement mark on the front trouser. We can re-iron the mark into it, folding it over so that it's lined up with the chalk marking. Move the silicia behind the big facing out of the way. Get them lined up together and pin the seam in place. First, pin it parallel to the crease to fold it back to see whether it's in the correct place before pinning it perpendicular to the crease to machine it down. Only those 2 layers though. Keep the pocket behind it out of the way. We don't necessarily need to backtack on the top, but follow the crease and end once again at the notch. Definitely backtacking at the bottom. Since we used a small centimetre seam allowance for the first stitch we did, this stitch should sit 2 to 3 millimeters from it. If you found yourself having sewn it in the wrong place, you might be able to try again before you take out the previous stitches, and if you were behind where you were supposed to be, you won't have to take them out at all. You should be able to create a box like we did in the sample, and that technically will give you a better finish. I think though. I'm not sure if it works with this method of putting on the waistband. I think we could have done these last 2 sets of stitches with 1 trip to the machine if we prepared them at the same time. Here I'm just placing the pocketing and facing portion of the bag into the seam allowance that I just sewed. We'll secure the pocket opening. We'll baste along the opening, keeping the front trouser bled to the facing side to hide the seam. I'm kind of cheating here because I sewed more here, but just sew between the small facing and the front through the pocket opening to keep the seam bled. That's better than what I did. I'm just looking at my trousers for my own reasons here. Our fronts and backs are now ready to put together to make the legs.